Hey guys, I'm here to do my first official Women's Prize review for this year on the much discussed debut, The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gowar, which is a really sexy book on the outside. I was sent a copy by Harville Secker, which is part of Vintage, and Suzanne Dean's design. I mean, I've given her kudos before on this channel for her work with Vintage, and she's just killing it here. But since there is such a draw to owning this as a physical book, and it's gotten plenty of buzz, a non-spoilery review is maybe even more helpful than usual in helping people decide if the contents are worth their time. This is set in 1780s London and split into 3 parts. We open with a merchant named Jonah Hancock as one of his captains returns with the news that he sold one of his ships in exchange for what appears to be a small mummified mermaid. To try to recoup his losses, Hancock starts selling tickets for people to see it, and this leads him in the first part of the book to meeting a woman named Angelica Neal, who's essentially a high-class courtesan looking for her next provider. I'm going to start with some of the positives because there's plenty to like and admire about this book. My favorite aspect was the sentence-by-sentence prose. Gowar seems so poised, everything flows beautifully, and the writing itself is like a petticoat. Some lacing and frills, but also this starched quality, this precision. So for example, there's a passage where Angelica takes a new lover, and the first time they're in bed together, they just sleep because they're so tired. So we get some lovely descriptions of them registering the details of each other's faces, and then they fall asleep. His nose grazing her ear and his lips just upon her neck until each of their breaths slows. Thus they sleep and thus they wake. There ought to be little else said on the matter, for lovers are all the same, and only of interest to themselves, but on this count it is remarkable. Angelica Neal has not felt this way before. Or if she has forgot. She who has made it her living to be touched thus, looked at thus, and rarely found it onerous, has forgot until now the joy of it. Later she will whisper that she will never want any other man again. Such is the drug which, dewed on the eyelids, makes yesterday inconsequential, and tomorrow certain, and today golden. And I love that dewed on the eyelids reference to A Midsummer Night's Dream, a play all about characters falling in love with the wrong people. Of course, it's all fun and games in that play because no one's financial security depends on love. And that's another strength of this novel, the way it examines money, class mobility or lack of it, various forms of prostituting yourself, the negotiations of sex, how your capital takes different forms depending on your background, profession, gender, and class. We get a strong sense of the precariousness of life for women like Angelica, and an incisive portrait of this period when people of new money, like Mr. Hancock, were spending their ways into the upper echelons of society, whether they were welcome there or not. But this attention to social commentary isn't always a strength. So for example, there's a subplot involving 2 Black characters, and it was really nice not to have the presence of Black Brits in this time period completely erased, as often happens. But this subplot feels very much inserted for the purpose of checking this box and isn't as sharp as a lot of the other societal observations. With historical fiction, there's always the question of how organically the author inserts period details. This book is clearly proud of its background research, and it does add authenticity and flair to so many scenes. There's one where Angelica and a friend enter a confectioner's shop, and the descriptions of striped jellies and tarts, sparkling sherbets and syrups and sugar plums are so decadent. The shop is described as a temple to sugar, and the words are as delicious in their own way as you imagine the desserts would be. And something that I think saves the period details from feeling too showy on the part of the author is the professions of the 2 main characters. Mr. Hancock is a merchant who sells all kinds of goods, so it makes sense for him to notice the materials and textures of the clothes and furniture and trinkets that come his way. And Angelica scrutinizes the quality of every object because they're all status symbols. signs of how comfortably a woman is living and how secure her present situation is with whoever's supporting her at the time. Now, one thing I appreciate about these characters is that they're not clearly skewed towards being likable or unlikable, admirable or contemptible. We get select personal details about Hancock and Angelica's families, losses they've had, and we see how past loss motivates them now. But they're not remarkable people beyond their specific fields. Hancock is fundamentally a simple man, and when he's asked to comment on any worldly issues beyond trade, he doesn't know what to say. He's immediately out of his depth. Angelica is naturally intelligent, but shallow. In conversation, she drops the names and facts she needs to drop. She has no interest in developing her own knowledge base or taste with regard to most topics. She readily acknowledges that the appearance of taste and education is more important than the reality of either. So in some ways I really liked that the text doesn't treat these characters like they're extraordinary just because they're protagonists. But an issue is that none of the characters develops. Their circumstances fluctuate throughout, but as people, there's no corresponding gradual change. One character's priorities do shift radically at the beginning of book 3, but it happens so fast that the reader basically gets personality whiplash. Those changes are clearly plot directed, and this gets to the core of the book's problems for me. The plotting and pacing throughout are poor. And I'm not saying that I wanted this to be faster or more eventful. I enjoyed the languor of individual scenes, but pretty much all the plots are predictable. So for example, when Angelica takes that new lover near the beginning, I knew exactly what was going to happen with that over the next few hundred pages. And there are big events that you anticipate because they're obvious, but they have very little emotional backing from earlier scenes to make them as impactful as the author intends. And this is partly because Gowar spreads herself thin across so many characters and ideas. Then part 3 is pretty much its own book, with a completely half-assed magical realist element that's meant to up the ante with the mermaid imagery and themes. This idea that we all have desires that call to us and make us unsatisfied with our lives, even if those lives are essentially happy. But with this fantastical element comes a new conflict that doesn't evolve in any direction and then is just tidily wrapped up in the last few pages or so. And like I said before, this book has several subplots, most of which are dropped for part 3 until near the very end when the author's like, oh yeah, I was writing these other novels too. Allow me to resolve them as precipitously as possible. The result of these various problems is that The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock ends up feeling like less than the sum of its parts. I can turn to plenty of individual scenes and think that they were cleverly constructed and well written, but they don't always build on one another. It's almost like we reset for each new scene. And ultimately, what's strangest to me about this book is that it has brains and style in spades, but very little heart. And it's being compared to The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry, and I understand why that is. They're both meticulously researched historical fiction set in Britain. But what's striking about The Essex Serpent in comparison to this book is how fondly the narrator treats the characters and the way Perry effortlessly balances the full humanity of those characters with big themes. The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock is much more of a set-piece novel. Gowar constructs situations where she can comment on gender and class, but the plots drive the characters, not the other way around. And she presents themes where Perry engages with them. So overall, I wasn't blown away, but I was impressed by Gowar's writing and had a lot of fun with this novel. And I think you should pick it up if the setting appeals to you. Definitely do if that's the case. Or if you're in the mood for a bit of a romp. Don't expect hard-hitting emotions or deep examinations for the most part. They do make appearances, but I would say this book is like Angelica Neal. Flashy, smart, but vapid, occasionally reflective, but mostly interested in flitting around and having a good time. Let me know what you think about The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock if you read it or are planning on reading it, and I'll see you soon for another Women's Prize review. Bye guys, thanks for watching.